loud. From MNT-EC, the Micro Nanotechnology Education Center, and JTE, the Journal of Advanced Technological Education, this is the JATE Writer Studio. In each session, we'll have a guided conversation with a published author. We highlight the authors who publish articles in peer-reviewed journals, like the JATE, so they can share their story and writing process with you. We want to give authors a voice to share their tips and tricks about how to write peer-reviewed articles. Today, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Kristyn VanderWaal Mills. And she is from St. Paul College in St. Paul, Minnesota. Today, we'll discuss Dr. VanderWaal Mills' article, Student Career Goals and Science Attitudes at an Urban Community College. Dr. Mills, welcome and thanks for being with us today.
You're welcome, and please feel free to call me Kristyn throughout today.
Okay, not a problem, not a problem. All right, Kristyn, before we talk about writing in your JAT article, I'd like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. Could you please describe where you work and talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. Like you said, my name is Kristyn VanderWaal Mills. I am a biology faculty at a community college in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's called St. Paul College. We are right smack in the middle of the downtown area, so that we look out one way and we see the Capitol, and we look out the other way and we see all the tall buildings of downtown St. Paul. And so I work at a very diverse, very urban college. I have been there since 2018, and before that, maybe 2017, something like that. Before that, I worked at a sort of a fringe rural community college called Anoka Technical College, and another I adjuncted. So I've been teaching for a while as my primary role, but my background is actually molecular biology. So my PhD is in genetics and cell biology, and I did publish a few papers as a graduate student and an undergrad, but always with a lot of help, we'll put it that way, from either my advisor or other authors. So this, I've only written 2 papers in the educational research world. So one a few years ago about open educational resources, and then this one. And I think it was a lot different writing them on my own, but that's my background. So I do have background in writing papers or in research and academia, but it was all new to me to be doing education research and publishing in education research journals, and then also doing writing all on my own without the close mentorship of others.
Gotcha. So that brings up an interesting point, which we'll get into a little later. But the 2 articles that you wrote, the one for open resources and this past one, did you use, you don't have to go into detail, but did you use kind of the same techniques, or were they 2 different techniques?
I used very closely overlapping techniques,
Okay.
and that was purposeful.
Awesome. All right. So, number one, how did you come up with the idea for your article?
Really, the article idea came from the work that we were already doing as part of our ATE grant. And I don't know that everyone in this group is on an ATE grant or was, but I'm guessing most people were. So when we wrote our grants, I think this is still the case, but I'm not sure. We had to have a research component as part of the grant. So our research component was to look at career goals of our students and try to figure out what drove them, and why they chose the career they did, with the idea that it would help us understand the program we were designing as part of the ATE grant. So really, it came right out. The idea came well before the paper, when we were actually writing the ATE grant, probably 5 years ago now.
Okay. All right. And I do believe almost everyone here in this writers group is either on a grant or they've helped with a grant. And yes, just for example, for my project, we actually did our research. It was based on the evaluation, or the evaluator helped us do a little bit of research so we can disseminate it throughout the different conferences and whatnot, and the JATE. All right, so next question. How did you find co-authors for your article? When you can't find co-authors, can you go at it by yourself? And also, how did your co-authors contribute to writing your paper?
I think it's probably worth mentioning my previous paper here as well, because I know that a lot of the ATE authors or potential authors that are in this group are in similar boats to me, right? They're at a community college. There's not a whole lot of people around them that are writing papers. There's not necessarily you certainly don't have graduate students or postdocs that you're going to have help write your papers. So I really did have to seek out some additional help. And also, I'm not an expert in some of the statistical tools and some of these, so I really had to go seek out. So my previous paper, it turns out I had in the family. My sister is a professor as well, and she's really good at analyzing large data sets. So I enlisted her help and her co-authorship to help write do the analysis for all the statistics. And I also just asked the people, this is for both papers, I asked the people that worked on the grant with us if they were interested in being co-authors. And several said no. I mean, it certainly wasn't like everyone was like, sure, that sounds great. Sign me up. But I did have a faculty member from a different college help write the previous grant. And for this one, my co-PI, actually, he was the main PI and also happens to be my husband, co-wrote this paper with me. And frankly, he was interested in writing the paper because we thought this would be kind of an interesting project for us to do together. The ATE program, the JETE program was interesting to us. We thought the idea of going to a conference in New Orleans sounded fun. So that was an incentive for him to be a co-author. I think if he hadn't had that incentive, he would not have signed up to be a co-author.
Okay.
So he was sort of just on it because it's like, well, this sounds good. He knew that I would do most of the heavy lifting, so he knew that he'd be more of a intro writer and proofreader than he would be having to do it. So I think you can do it on your own. For both papers, I did the absolute brunt of the writing and the brunt of the actual day-to-day work. And it is not impossible, but I found for both papers, it was really useful to have people who were experts in these areas proofread and give me feedback, because otherwise I don't know that it'd be good enough to publish, I guess.
Understand. All right.
They weren't co-authors. They were just trusted mentors and people willing to read the paper.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So let's go back to before you wrote this paper. What did you do first once you decided you wanted to write this paper?
So the first thing I'm trying to remember, because the ATE writing group was really useful because we had these sort of sub goals throughout the year to try and like, first we had to write like an outline, then we had to write the intro, right? There were these goals, and that really helped. So because it helped you decide what to do first. Generally though, I always start with what results I have. So that's like my first thing, is I actually look to see I do some analysis, and I think about what stories I have with the data I have currently. So I start with, and this is maybe from my molecular biology background as well, like you start by doing the experiments that are related to your question and create the figures and figure out what story you have to tell. And that's the first thing I do. So the first thing I figured out is what figures, what data, I suppose, and the figures that would go with the data would make sense for the story. And I sort of outlined the results section first. And anything else so I did that first and then got feedback. And I think that was really useful to get feedback on that, because I think I tend to want to share all the data, because I'm like, it's all interesting. I want to tell you all the stuff, and it ends up making the paper muddy. Like, it's hard to see what's important because there's so many different interesting things. So I think after I did that initial outline of here's all the different data that we could do, my mentor for JAT was like, yeah, I think just make it simple. You don't need to share like 15 different results. Let's keep it to like what are the most important things people would take away with, and just do figures related to those. And that was really helpful because once I had that, the rest of the paper practically wrote itself once I could tell the clear story. So that's where I started.
Okay, okay. So, you were part of the JATE, I believe, and Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, was it JATE Connects? Was that this project that we were on? All right, so JATE Connects. You had a mentor that helped you write this paper. How instrumental was that mentor in helping you write the paper? AKA, we had, because I was part of that, I was part of that program as well. I believe I saw you in New Orleans.
I'm
It was
pretty sure
so
I
much going
recognize
on.
you.
We probably sat beside each other. Yeah, but as far as the mentor, how did they help you shape your paper? You said that you had a lot of information. They said, hey, this is too much, maybe add A, B, C, and D. How did they really help you shape that paper? Just in case some of us that are, or some of the people that are watching this video will be using JAT Connect mentors to help them write their paper.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit
So
about that process?
mentoring, and this is true in all cases of mentoring, is as diverse as people, there are people, right? Every mentor is going to have a very different style and a different feeling. And I kind of preface that because I don't want to like say that my mentor wasn't great, but I would say she was pretty hands off. I mean, she did give us some feedback a little bit, and there was like a little bit of reminders of when the deadlines were, and like, but I felt that I didn't always get as much feedback as I really wanted to. And then when we almost rewrote the whole paper when we came to New Orleans, because then our mentor couldn't come. And
Mm.
so what happened is then at the end, my paper, who I'd been working with more with my mentor, and so she was more familiar with it, was handed off to a strange mentor who'd never seen it before. Fresh eyes.
Yes.
And who really gave a lot of good constructive criticism. But it basically meant I had to like, it felt like I was rewriting the whole thing in the 3 days that we were there. So I guess that part was instrumental in making the paper really good. Now, if I was to redo it, I would have liked to have that step happen like a month before. So like it would be nice to almost have two mentors, if that makes sense, to have like one
Yeah.
mentor who's like helping you, making sure you're meeting your deadlines and giving like the week to week, and then a second person who's basically your almost like your editor in a way, right? Like, all right, I
Yeah.
think I've got a draft. Here you go. Before I really like finalize it all, can you just take a look and tell me your honest opinion on how it would work? That that final step was instrumental in making a coherent paper that told a nice, well-rounded story, but it was rushed at the end because we were like, oh my gosh, we have to get this done in 3 days. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
so it
that
was
was
instrumental in making it a good paper and not just a passable paper.
awesome. Awesome. Yeah, we actually ran into that same issue. And there was one point, I think it was the second day of that conference. We just walked away, sat out in the hallway, talked with our mentor, and we almost had to rewrite our paper. And it was pins and needles there for a couple of hours, but we ran the same thing. But that was absolutely vital because if we would have turned in that first paper, it probably wouldn't have made too much sense. So having those second, third, and fourth set of eyes
It was almost
during
like
both.
a pre-peer review in a way, right?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
before I get through the scary actual peer review, and I'm like, I feel
Uh-huh.
like more high stakes. It was like a pre-peer review where they looked at
Yeah.
it and said, oh, well, we really like this whole intro paragraph. I don't think even is what you want to say for your intro. Like
Mhm.
there was a lot of stuff that we had
Yeah.
to work through.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So sometimes writers feel like they don't have enough. They don't have enough data. They don't have enough participants. They don't have enough experience or time to write these papers. How did you know you had enough to start writing this article?
That's a very good question because I think that is the age-old question, especially if you're not in. Well, I mean, I guess I am in the field, and we sell ourselves short to say that we're not biology or whatever science education researchers because we are. Like as community college faculty doing this work, we are education researchers, but we're not doing it as our primary role, which I think can make us all feel a little bit less confident in our own abilities and our skills. And so you're second guessing a lot. I'm writing a paper every 5 years, right? Like colleagues who are doing this as their main goal are writing 5 to 10 papers per year in their lab, right? So this is a very real question to me, is like, how do I know that I have a coherent story and a good enough story? One thing that helped me, and this maybe sounds a little odd, but I knew I wasn't trying to get into LSE, which is life science education, which is sort of like, I don't know, like a more, how do you, there's probably a word for it, right? What do you call the journals that like everyone wants to be in that are like the best in that field? That's kind of like the journal for biology education research. It's part of the Cell group of journals. So anyways, it just feels like it's harder to get in. You have to be that much better to get in. So in some ways, I'm not trying to say that JATE is like a bad journal. It's just, it's got a more niche group of people that are going to write for it.
Right.
And the readership is not the same. So I felt like I didn't need to have as perfect of a story. I didn't need to have as high of an N. And I think the lesson for me is you don't always need to publish in LSE or whatever your top journal is in your field to publish. For us, at least for me, I'm not getting anything from my university for having a higher H value journal that my paper's in. This is really for me to be able to say, yeah, I disseminated my work. Now, if I go and write another grant, I can say, look, we actually wrote a paper from our last grant. I don't think anyone's going to split hairs about whether or not it was a top journal or JATE with a much smaller readership. They're going to say, well, she went through the work, or they went through the work to actually publish this. So what I encourage people to think of is, if you have a story to tell, you can probably tell it. And qualitative research is still research. Research that you only have an N of 20 is still research. It just, you have to make sure that you're framing it such when you're writing it up. Like make sure you're talking about the limitations and the caveats. If you have a small N, think about how you can take qualitative data to help beef up, or maybe you want more qualitative data if you're only going to have 10 or 20 students in your study group. So there are ways to do it. And that was something I learned in a different workshop, actually, is how you can still write a good paper with a small amount of data. And often it's easier to tell your story if you don't have gobs of data and a million different questions you can ask with it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just to give a shameless plug for you all that are looking to write an article, you can go to the MNTech website, Micro Nanotechnology Education Center. Look to the left-hand side, and you can publish you can submit your article there. All right.
We didn't talk about time. That's another question.
So how did you feel about time?
Because I think that's a different question. And I guess I've had this discussion. I'm still part of a group called CC Bio Insights, which was a group to learn about how to do education research specifically for community colleges. And we had this discussion a couple years ago about whether or not it should even be asked of community college faculty to publish, because it does take a lot of time. And I don't want to give the false impression that I did this just because it was fun. Like, I mean, I did this because I was part of a program that was going to support me in the writing, both monetarily and with expertise and a mentor and so forth. I'm not going to publish another paper unless I have that kind of support again. Just because I have a million other things to do. I've got another grant, I've got teaching, I've got all the things. And most of my college doesn't know or care that I published a paper. Like they might be like, good job, good for you. And that's it, right? Like there's no, that has nothing to do with my promotions or my tenure or anything like that. So I guess what I would say to faculty who are thinking about this with time is really think about, maybe this should be a sabbatical project for you, right? Like maybe I'm going to write a paper while I'm sabbatical, or maybe I can be part of a program such as ATE Connects or other such programs that are going to give me some support in my writing. Just because I don't want people to get burned out. I think it's really important for us to publish work and for community college research to be part of the body of research in education. But I don't want all of these community college faculty to burn out in the process of trying to do that. So my best suggestion is just really think about it as you're going in, or maybe you give yourself 2 years to write a paper. If you're doing this on your own, don't try and do it all in like 1 year and set yourself goals. So just little bits that you're doing. There's probably no rush giving it out.
Yeah, I definitely suggest that as well. Don't try to get it all done in 1 month because that's going to be impossible. Plus, especially at community colleges, you look up one day, well, you're at beginning of the week, you may not have anything on your calendar. And by Tuesday or Wednesday, the rest of your calendar's full. So, yep, I would definitely give yourself some time to write these articles if you are going to do it. All right. Okay, so when you write your peer review journals, do you write them top down or do you write them bottom up? In other words, how do you write the sections? Do you write them in order or do you write them in out of order? Tell us your process on how you write or your writing process.
I definitely, kind of like you said, what did I do first? I definitely do not write top bottom. I mean, I write the abstract last. The intro is the second to the last thing I write. I don't write the intro until other than the question. I want to make sure I have my question hypothesis done. But that's the only part of the intro section that'll be done. So I actually start with the results and the figures. And then my second thing I do is usually the methods, just because it goes, you may as well do it while you're doing your results, while it's all fresh in your mind as you're, figuring out how you wrote it, and then you don't have to overwrite the result or the method section. And then I'll do the discussion. And finally, I'll do the intro and the abstract and limitations. It feels very jumpy around, but it does seem to work pretty well because I don't know what I need to introduce in the intro until I know what I'm going to talk about for my conclusions. That being said, I will make notes. I mean, you have to do some you do have to do some literature search stuff before you dive in too far, but I don't actually write it. I'll just have notes. Like, here's a bunch of notes from different journal articles that might be pertinent to my article, but I'm not going to write it in paragraph form because I don't know which pieces are going to be the most useful in the intro. So I saved the intro for last.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so this is going to be like a two-part question. Number one, in terms of time, how long did it take for you to write this article? And also, how did you find your references to include in this article?
How much time? I have
Yes.
no idea. I wish I could give you a number of hours. I think partly it's because of the way that my writing process ends up being like in between meetings. I did end up finding where I would take a couple days where I'd be like, this Friday afternoon, I'm not going to book anything, like off limits, because I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write for 3 hours. I personally really struggle to write in little bits and pieces. I need a chunk to kind of get into it and work for a while. But I don't think I could put in hours and have any idea if I'm accurate. It's certainly more than 20.
Okay. No problem. All right.
I don't know
And
how much more.
yeah. Okay.
But references.
Yes.
So this is a challenge as a community college faculty because I don't have access to many articles because our school doesn't have access to those articles. I actually rely a lot on Google Scholar. That's my one that I use the most, and I read the abstracts and I decide whether they're good or not. And if they're in an open access journal, I will then be able to go and read them. If they're not in an open access journal, frankly, sometimes I just don't use them, which is a good argument for more people to do open access journals, because like what happens is that people can't access that research. And so then I skip it in some cases. Or if it sounds really good based on the abstract, and there's only a couple that I felt like I needed to have, I had a couple of contacts at different colleges of universities, and I would ask them to pull, but I felt bad asking them to, like, if there was 20 different papers, I didn't want them to have to go find PDFs of 20 different papers for me. So I really wanted to be deliberate about which ones I asked them to send me. So it was usually like, it was probably 3 or 4 papers that I had them send me the full text of that I didn't have access to, that weren't open access, or that I just was like, oh, the abstract is good enough. They'll cite the abstract, cite it based on the abstract. So that's how that's what I did for references.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So, manuscript and submitting it. What was the manuscript process like? And also, what documents did you need to upload?
Mm, boy, I feel like you should be asking Janet this instead of me. Let's see what I remember. How much do I remember about what I had? First off, I thought that process was by far the easiest of the whole
Yeah,
thing. Um, Writing the intro letter, that was a little bit like, oh, I didn't think of that. So that was sort of a last minute thing, I think. Do you remember you recall what I'm talking about? Wasn't there some sort of cover letter we had to submit?
I believe so. Look, all of that was a blur. I
I know, that's what I'm
do
thinking. I'm
remember
like,
writing
it's
it, but
all
I can't
blur.
see what was on it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So as far as the submission, I believe we had a template that we had to use. How did you feel about using that template that was
That
presented
helped a
to you?
lot. The
Yeah.
template helped a lot. And there was like a list. I think it really helped that we were all in one space when we
Hmm.
were doing this or like learning about the submission. And I know that's not going to be available for all writers in the future, but it was really nice to have the JATE editor like right there to be like, oh, do you want me to send it? Should I submit it as this or can I submit this low quality one? You know, so it made the whole that part seem more streamlined than it maybe would have been if I was just sitting at home on my computer trying to figure it out, navigate it.
Right.
So the template was really helpful. Knowing that I didn't need to have like the final version of some of the figures was helpful. I'm sorry, I've
Hmm.
got to put someone coming in and out. So let me turn on focus so I don't get that anymore. So yeah, that was helpful. What else did we submit? Um, it really didn't seem that daunting to do all the submission parts. I mean, I think it was a text. I think we had to submit all the text file and then the figures as separate files. But now I'm trying to remember. Maybe we submitted all at
No,
Janet.
no, that was right.
Remember?
That was right. Well, yeah, we submitted
Yeah,
the template itself for the article, and then for the figures, we had to submit those in whatever program we use in like a
that's right.
separate folder. Yep.
So that part was tricky because I do remember this because I made several of my figures in R.
Hmm.
Which the R original source code is not something that's very necessarily easy to like email through.
Right.
So that was a little awkward for me. I do remember that because I had to have this conversation about, well, what should I send it in? Because I don't have, we had to like send the, like if you made it in Excel, you had to send the
Yeah.
Excel
Correct.
document so they could like, play with the colors or
Yeah.
whatever, or find the
Hmm.
original format. But since I made it in R, I didn't have, there wasn't an Excel to go with it. So that was,
Yeah.
I do recall that. That was a little challenging, but we, it, an email or in the case of us being there, a little conversation went a long way to figure out the best way to submit that.
Right. Right. Yep. So, Janet saying that you have to have high resolution and also the native files in those attachments
Native
whenever you're
files, that's
submitting
what it
your
was
article.
called.
Yep. That's it. Yep. Yep. I think one of the issues that I had with mine was when we redid the article, I think I changed one of the figures, but the native file was a totally different one. So they were asking me which one is which, and I was like, they're both the same. And then I looked at it and I was like, oh no, that's wrong. So I had to fix that. But otherwise, that process for us as well, that was pretty painless. That was actually the easiest part. Yeah, submitting those files.
One of the hard parts for me was our no, maybe this happened actually later. It might have been the peer review process, but someone asked
Mhm.
us to change the colors in one of the figures, and it was like, I don't know how to change colors in a figure that I made in R. Someone gave me the code in order to make this figure in R. I am not enough of an R guru to be able to just change it. I had to like frantically contact again. It's nice to have a network of people, but someone who's much better at R than I am, and be like, "Hey, can you help me with this?" Happened to
Mhm.
be at a conference, so it was perfect. So I was able
Okay.
to like grab them at the conference. They're like, "Oh, great, let me just give me your computer." And I just, "Do-do-do-do. Here you go, it's fixed."
Nice. Very nice. Very nice. All right. So speaking about peer reviews, what was that process like? How did reading the reviews after you submitted your article, how did that make you feel? And what did you do once you received those reviews?
Um, that part is like, that's a little scary. I mean, to be perfectly honest, the peer review process still intimidates me, even thinking in the far future where I might have another paper. Um, it's because you're having someone look at it anonymously and then giving you like full-on feedback, and you don't know who it is that's reading it. And then also you don't know, like, I don't know, I think some people are more constructive than others, will say, in a peer review. And that can be, it can be hard to read someone who has maybe some negative things to say about a paper you worked really hard on, right? Like, it's, so there was definitely a little bit of mixed feelings about, oh, but they were generally positive. I really liked, I'm trying to remember, one of the, I'm trying to see if I have the reviews in here, and here's my rebuttal letter. That's probably, so they wrote these little, a couple of them wrote a little blurb at the beginning of the review that kind of, with their overall thoughts about it, that was nice. Because they often said something kind of positive in
Yeah.
that, sort of their overall impressions. And I really like that. And I don't think all three reviewers did that. But that was something I really liked as a reader, because I felt like it gave me some context before digging into all the like nitty-gritty bits and pieces. The peer review process, though, did take a while. I mean, my rebuttal is 7 pages long with all of, because you have to address everything that they, or almost everything that they come up with. And I think I had some debates because sometimes they don't even agree. Like, one person thinks one part's fine and the other one doesn't. And so either you're trying to figure out, like, so do I change it or do I not change it? I chose to somehow address everything that the reviewers came up with. Like, so I at least responded about everything that they had mentioned. I would say stuff like, and some of it was easy, like, oh, there's a typo. It's like, great, I fixed that, check.
Yeah.
But there were some that are like, well, you think you use too strong of language here, or you need more literature review to support this statement, and things like that. So it really did make it a stronger paper at the end. It was hard to read at first, but once you dig into actually doing the reviews, it wasn't so terrible.
Okay. Okay. That sounds good. Sounds good. All right.
It took a lot less
And-
time, I think 6 hours maybe to do the
okay.
review. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. All right. So we've got one last question for you. What advice would you give to new writers who are starting their first peer-reviewed journal article?
Gosh, I mean, there's a lot. I could give like a whole list of advice, right? Like, there's a lot of
That's
things we could come up with for advice. One, I think the journal selection is going to be really important. And I know a lot of the people in this group might be writing for JATE, but different journals have very different tones and expectations and amounts of data that they're going to expect. And I think it's probably useful to contact, if you don't, either talk to people who've published in the journal you're interested in doing it, or contact their corresponding editor and say, hey, I've got, tell them a little bit of your story. Is this the type of paper that would fit? Because it would be really disappointing to like have this journal in mind and then go down that road and find out like this is not the right type of paper even that they would be looking for, or it's not in depth enough, or it's not the right type of format, right? So I think finding that, doing some homework before you start writing the paper as to what journal you're going to publish in is going to be really useful. And then finding some people that have either published in it or talking to someone who's an editor in that journal to find out a little bit more about, expectations of what it would be like to publish in that journal. My other paper is in LSE, and it was a very different type of experience writing for that journal as compared to JATE.
okay.
Just the way they wanted you to submit things was different. There's just a lot of differences in the writing, especially on the back end of how you submit things and formats and such.
Okay. All right. Cool. Cool. All right. Well, that's all the questions that we have for you today. Kristyn, again, I'd like to thank you for talking with us to the Micro Nano Technology Education Center and the JATE Writers Group. Other than that, I hope that you have a great weekend and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Did you get your paper published too, Thomas?
Yes, I did.
Way to go.